Being attracted, falling in love, developing a relationship, these can discretely be described neuroscientifically. So being attracted actually starts in the thalamus. So the thalamus is our sensory organ of the brain. It's kind of the sensory gateway. So it interprets a lot of sensory stimuli. So when I first meet someone, I'm like, oh, they look really good, right? It looks really fantastic. And I feel physically attracted to them. They smell great. Their laugh is beautiful. So the initial stages of attraction are all about sensory input. Then what happens, now this is what's really interesting. Falling in love is actually very dopaminergic. So this is one of the reasons why I think we're seeing declining birth rates. This is why it's like if you talk to people nowadays, like it's hard to fall in love. Everyone's dating, everyone's going out on dates and stuff, but like falling in love seems harder. And that's actually because of dopamine. So what happens is if you look at the phase of falling in love, what that involves is a dopaminergic connection. And a great example of this is like if we're going to dinner, right? And I put my hand out, just Stephen, hold my hand. And then we're gazing into each other's eyes and we're just holding hands. And then we feel in love. And if you kind of think about people in love, like it's like a dopaminergic high because that's literally what's going on. Now what you see, if you go to a restaurant and you people watch, which I love to do, what you'll see is two people on a date, both on their phones. So what's starting to happen is we're like developing this dopaminergic tolerance through things like devices. We're actually exhausting our dopamine, which is something that a lot of people don't understand. We run out of dopamine because we're using these devices, and then we have none left to fall in love. And then there are later things in the relationship that are more serotonergic in nature, where it's not as much about pleasure, but it's about connection and all kinds of other stuff.
So what does that mean if I'm single and I'm looking to find love?
So if you're looking to find love, this is where we have to start with diagnosis before solutions, right? So the first question is, do you have trouble falling in love? Because a lot of people who are single are like, oh, like, I don't feel anything, right? I don't feel a connection. This is something that I've heard so much from our community, so much from patients anymore. I just don't feel a connection. They seem great on paper, but I just don't feel a connection. There's actually neuroscience behind how to form a connection too. But the first question that I ask people is, okay, do you feel like you just can't feel an emotional connection to people? Then what you actually need to do is reduce your dopamine activation through things like cell phones. We see this also with pornography, where we know that pornography correlates with like unhappiness in relationships. And that's probably also like a dopaminergic effect as opposed to all the other things. There's a lot of stuff going on there. So play fewer video games, be on your phone less, and especially before you go on a date, you want to like give your dopamine a chance to recharge. So go on a walk for about 1 hour before you go on a date, and then your brain's capacity to engage in a date and fall in love and activate those feelings is going to be higher. Also, I'd avoid as much dopaminergic activity as you can before the date, before you see that person. And the more that you do that, the easier it will be for you to actually fall in love.
Am I right in thinking from what you said there that dopamine is required for us to initiate sex and want to have sex? Is that what you were saying?
Yes and no. So dopamine is not actually required to initiate sex. It's so fascinating. You can so I tried to figure this out. Like how does love work in the brain? It's like every circuit is involved. Every neurotransmitter is involved. So dopamine is what gives us the pleasure of orgasm. But initiating sex, also for men and women, is somewhat different. So like, women will say like, oh, foreplay is really important, right? And dudes are like, we don't need a whole lot of that. And so the question is why? So this is what's really interesting. So to develop an erection, you actually need activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system that involves rest and digest, which is why we have morning wood, right? So when dudes wake up in the morning, we have an erection. Why? We're not like horny in the morning. Well, I don't think so anyway, maybe, who knows? But like there's a physiology to it, right? Where when we're relaxed, we'll develop an erection because the development of an erection actually involves relaxation. And then the sexual act involves transition to the sympathetic nervous system. Now this is the fight and flight kind of response. So what we want to do is we want to be relaxed first, and then we start getting sweaty, our heart rate increases, blood pressure increases. And this is the other thing that a lot of dudes don't understand because our nervous system is a little bit different. So when it comes to women, they have the same thing going on where they need activation of the parasympathetic nervous system before they get activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And then as you activate the parasympathetic nervous system with something like a massage or making out or something like that, some playfulness, relaxation, people really need to feel safe. Then you can sort of graduate to the more explicit sympathetic nervous system sexual act.
This is answered so many questions that I had that I've never sort of vocalized because I didn't realize the issue. But I have come to learn that I am most aroused when I'm not stressed in any way. But I don't just mean stressed as in like, oh, stressed. I mean, if it's Friday night and I've just come back from work and I've got home at 9 p.m. after a really, really long day and week, I am not aroused typically. So what tends to happen, and like we know this in my relationship, and it's the same for my partner, is on like Saturday, once I've had time to relax and I've like chilled down and I've all those kind of things, then I get aroused. And there is this, I think, misunderstanding between men and women because we get aroused in different ways.
Absolutely. Once again, like we're seeing so many problems in relationships, so many problems in dating. And you know, what happens is like women will get branded as all kinds of she's an ice queen or whatever she won't put out. And like, there's a lot of like toxic misogyny there. And then men will also get branded as like, oh, men only want one thing and they're you know, so horny, which can somewhat be true. But I think this is the kind of thing where once you understand, you know, how does the male body work? How does the female body work? What are the ways? Because the majority of it is actually very similar. So like what separates men and women is less than what we share. Mm-hmm. So if you look at, for example, like how to create romantic attraction on a first date, like there's a lot of good like neuroscience data about things to do. And it's not surprising at all because if you look at what's the trend in dates, everyone is doing the wrong things now. Dates are turning into like interviews, right? Where it's like, I need to know if I'm gonna waste my time or not. So we're gonna sit down at a table, oh, do you want kids? What do you want this? How much do you like to travel? How many trips per year? It almost becomes a negotiation. And if you look at the science of how human beings fall in love, it's completely different.
What is that relationship between, because as you're describing that dating process, in my head I thought, oh God, that sounds stressful. And then I thought of how expectation generally creates stress. So whether it's in the bedroom, having an expectation that we're gonna fuck tonight because it's Thursday and it's date night, or having an expectation when you go on a date, the impact that stress has on your dopamine and your ability to be like open and receptive.
Yeah, so it's so interesting, right? So like, I know it sounds kind of weird, but let's use your example of it's Thursday and we're gonna fuck tonight. So that can be stressful. Or like, I don't know if you've been in a relationship like this, it can be awesome, right? So like, if I haven't seen you all week and you haven't seen me all week and it's like Thursday and this is the time we've set aside and like we're finally meeting and we both are like, we're gonna fuck tonight, then it's great. Like, you know what I mean? Or not so much, or I don't know.
No, yeah.
Right, so like, this is the key thing that a lot of people don't understand. So attraction is not about whether we're gonna have sex tonight or not. It's that you and I need to be on the same page. So there's a really fascinating study that looked at first dates on bridges. Okay, so one bridge is a stone bridge. One bridge is a rickety wooden bridge that's wobbly. And what the study found is that when you have a date on a stone bridge, people feel less attracted to each other than when you're on a rickety bridge. Now, what's the difference? On the rickety bridge, I'm a little bit scared and you're a little bit scared. So what really the foundation of romantic attraction is actually empathic resonance. When I feel the same things that you feel, when we both feel, it doesn't even have to be good. It can be negative things, it can be good things. We just need to both be feeling the same thing. That's what creates attraction. This is also why people fall in love in rehab. Like literally at the rehabs that I've worked at, like we have to like almost have a rule, right? We can't technically control them, but we're like, hey, no fucking in rehab. So this is we're gonna have, and because people will trauma bond, right? We're sharing all of this deep emotional stuff. You can be honest, you can be authentic, and there's someone else in the group who's also honest and authentic and you feel connected. What is the nature of that connection? It's shared empathic resonance. So one of the biggest things that I tell people who are, you know, struggling to succeed in dating is like, what are the emotions that you're bringing to the table? What are the emotions they're bringing to the table? And if those emotions are not aligned, how can you do some kind of experience that creates an emotion? So this is also where like movies aren't necessarily good or bad. The question is, do you guys like the same kind of movies? If y'all like the same kind of movies and you both laugh a lot, that's a great date. You don't need to talk. You just need empathic resonance. So whatever you can do to get empathic resonance will create a connection.
My brain went in two directions then. The first question that popped into my head was about the role oxytocin's playing in all of that, because I've heard about this chemical called oxytocin, which is there to help us bond, etc. And I remember Simon Sinek saying to me that when like cities have earthquakes, it's crazy how much the city comes together, and he pointed at oxytocin as much of the reason for that sort of shared struggle. I was thinking about your rickety bridge scenario. Life sometimes becomes a rickety bridge and people bond because of that. So should I be taking my dates to theme parks for example, to terrify the shit out of them or watching?
Only if you're equally terrified.
Okay.
So that's why it's so important, right, for you to figure out, like, what is something that is going to give us a shared emotional experience.
Okay, so we've got to both have the same emotion.
Absolutely.
So if I'm not scared by it and she's terrified,
then that's generally speaking not good. Now, there are other versions of that. So like you can demonstrate caring, right? So if I'm terrified and you take care of me, then that can feel good in a different way. But generally speaking, like what gets us like, I'm into this person is that we feel an emotional connection, right? That's what I'm like into this person. They're like what is the nature? The emotional connection is shared emotion. So oxytocin is another phase of the relationship. So oxytocin forms emotional bonds. So when we feel like not this, and this is what's so interesting, there's different parts of the brain, different neurotransmitters. So oxytocin is what we get from cuddling, what we get from different kinds of touch. Something like a massage can form oxytocin, hugging, holding hands, all this kind of stuff triggers oxytocin. And oxytocin will form an emotional bond, will alleviate feelings of loneliness. I think one of the reasons that men are so lonely now is because we don't feel bonded to each other. So oxytocin is more about forming emotional bonds.
And the other way my brain went when we were talking about that is a question I've asked a lot of sex therapists I've spoken to, which is, should we be scheduling sex? This is such a tangent from where we started, but based on what you said, Thursday night, date night, etc. Should we be scheduling sex? When I ask sex experts this, they go in two different directions. One group says yes, one group is so passionately saying no, because it kills that spontaneity, they say, and that, you know.
Right, so I think this is a good example of like, this is exactly what I'm talking about, where we know so much more about physiology and neuroscience now that the right answer to that question depends on the science. So you can schedule sex, it's just make sure that you do the things. Are you killing some degree of spontaneity? Potentially. But at the same time, like, so what is it about the spontaneity? Like, let's tunnel down. I think this is exactly what we need to do. What is it that makes spontaneous sex fun, Stephen?
Oh, gosh. Fuck. What makes spontaneous sex fun? It is exciting, novel. It is...
Hold on. Who's excited by spontaneous sex?
Me.
So, and is it going to happen if your partner is not equally excited?
Well, I think most couples would say that much of the reason why their sex life is not great is because it's become boring and predictable and samey. So this sort of spontaneity element adds a bit of surprise and intrigue. And
now hold on a second. Okay, great. So this is we're gonna figure out an answer. When things become samey. So if I watch, like, what's your favorite movie, Stephen?
The Pursuit of Happiness.
Okay, so if I watch Pursuit of Happiness the first time, how am I gonna feel emotionally?
Oh, it was profound the first time I saw it.
Second time you watch it?
You know,
Third time?
Interesting.
Fourth time, fifth time. So the more that we get exposed to something, what changes within us? Our emotional, the emotions change, right? So the first time I do something, emotions are activated. When it becomes habitual, emotions no longer become activated. Right. So this is the problem of non-spontaneous or spontaneous sex, is it has to do with that emotional empathy, that emotional connection that leads to attraction. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. When we look at problems in life, should couples do this or should couples not do this? Let's understand the mechanisms at play, and then if we can activate those mechanisms in the right way, then it'll work. So the issue about spontaneity is like, you know, if you feel like having spontaneous sex, but your partner doesn't, that's not gonna work because y'all aren't emotionally, I mean, they can accommodate you and that can be fine. But generally speaking, what spontaneity adds is more of that emotional connection. So when I work with patients who are exhibitionistic, right? So like, why do they like exhibitionism?
What's exhibitionism?
Having sex in public places.
Okay.
So it's a kind of fetish, right? Can get you into trouble. That's sometimes how they end up in my office. But what if you really look at it, like what it's about is emotional resonance. So if I'm having sex in a public place, that's gonna activate me emotionally in some way. It's gonna activate my partner emotionally in the same way. That's why we do it. So it all comes down to emotional resonance. So the second thing is that if you're gonna have scheduled sex, so like spontaneous is great, but if you're gonna have scheduled sex, that's still fine too. It doesn't kill the spark. You just need to figure out how to activate it, right? So this is where activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. Do something like, give a massage, or even like the sex should come after some kind of emotional resonance. Let's go out and watch a movie together, or let's do something that we both find emotionally engaging. Then once you're emotionally connected, the sex it'll be a lot easier.
I have a friend who has been trying for a baby. I'm trying for a baby as well, by the way, but this is not about me. This is not me like asking for a friend. He lives in America and he has just had the news that he's having a baby. Very, very happy. And I saw him recently and I was asking him about the process of, timing the sex around your partner's cycle. And they'd gone for, I think, 3 years trying to have a baby. So it got increasingly more difficult, all of the complicated emotions. And he was saying to me, he was like, honestly, bro, like sometimes we were having to have sex like 3 or 4 times a day. And I was like, bro, how do you keep an erect, like when it becomes a job in that context, you're doing it because you need to try and hit this egg. How did you arouse yourself? And he was like, no, I couldn't. He was like, I really struggled. I'd lose my erection all the time. And he literally said to me, he was having sex 40, 50 times a month to try. And he was basically being ordered to have sex with her. Like, these are the 5 days you better have sex with me. That is maybe the extreme case of total dissipation of emotional resonance as it relates to sex.
Yeah.
And the other end of that pole would be pursuing someone for the first time, I guess, a stranger for the first time. And I guess the job for people in their relationships is how do you keep that emotional resonance?
So I think that's exactly the kind of question. And I think the first thing is that's half the answer, is that a lot of people don't realize. So like when people get bored sexually in a relationship, right? So we have 2 populations of people. Some people will get married and they'll continue to have healthy sex lives like well into their 70s. Like one of the craziest things that I remember encountering in med school was like, when I meet a 70-year-old, I don't think about sexual health counseling. And it's one of the biggest mistakes we make as doctors. Like, when you have these retirement communities and stuff, no one's worried about getting pregnant. You can get outbreaks of like syphilis and gonorrhea that'll tear through the community like COVID. Like it's crazy. Like we just don't, but sexual desire doesn't necessarily decrease with age. I know it's crazy, but so then the question becomes, okay, how do you maintain a healthy sexual relationship over time? So at the very beginning, there are things like thalamic inputs, right? So what you see arouses you. There's some amount of novelty, which is also like new emotions, right? So then the 10th time we watch the same movie, our emotional connection is less to the movie. But then this is also how couples have sex successfully over time, is that they do have emotional connections. So as you continue to bond with your partner over the new experiences that your relationship has. So I think having kids is a great example where like having kids will destroy your sex drive for some amount of time.
They say, 2 years or something?
On average, but even within that, it's amazing because you'll find these moments where like you sort of forget, right? Like how good sex with your partner is. And then the stars align and you have sex and it's actually like incredibly fantastic. It's like, oh, we should do that more, right? Like that's like what kind of starts to happen. So over time, what we want to do is really lean into still that shared emotional connection. Oh my God, I had such a, like, I can't believe that our kid, like finally, like the fever's gone. They're relaxing, we're gonna sleep. And then at like 2 a.m., you're gonna wake up and it's gonna be great, right? But like, and so as long as you maintain that bond, it's totally fine.